Hello, my friends. I'm Scott Ritter, and I want to walk you through what is really happening across several fronts of this unfolding geopolitical crisis. Because all these events, Venezuela, the Caribbean, Ukraine, Europe, the United States, even developments in science and space, are threads of the same fabric. Right now, Washington has placed the spotlight on Venezuela. Donald Trump has issued a hard ultimatum to Nicolas Maduro: abandon power under threat of a looming military escalation. The offer on the table from the United States included asylum for Maduro and his family, safe passage to a third country, and immunity from federal charges. But the negotiations stalled when Maduro's regime demanded to retain control of the armed forces and receive a blanket global amnesty. Washington's message is blunt: Maduro and his closest allies must leave Venezuela to permit what they call a democratic restoration or face severe consequences. Maduro, por su parte, is not just responding with speeches. He answers Trump's ultimatum with words, gestures, and even dances in front of his supporters. While Trump deploys warships, Maduro dances and mocks those threats, reinforcing his image domestically as a leader who refuses to bow. He has reappeared in public after several days of absence, using political rallies and choreographed displays of joy to signal that he is unafraid. Behind that theater, however, lies a very serious calculation. His army is small compared to the overwhelming military power of the United States. So Venezuela is preparing not for conventional war, but for a prolonged guerrilla struggle meant to spread chaos and make any U.S. invasion costly, slow, and politically toxic. According to documents and sources cited by agencies like Reuters, Caracas is planning precisely that: a resistance model designed to make it impossible for the United States to quickly topple Maduro and install a replacement. This planning is unfolding while the U.S. has massed more than 10 warships in the Caribbean, including its largest aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald Ford, amid rising tensions between Trump and Maduro. An expeditionary marine unit capable of amphibious landings has also been deployed, formally under the banner of a counter-narcotics operation to stop drug flows from Venezuela to U.S. shores. In parallel, Maduro has just announced the names of 12 new members of the Political Bureau of the Bolivarian Revolution, a high-level body designed to coordinate the political and social forces loyal to the project founded by Hugo Chavez. As he explained, he is appointing 12 compatriots to lead, at the highest level, the political and social forces of the Bolivarian Revolution, accompanying him as commander-in-chief. This takes place during a swearing-in ceremony for the so-called Bolivarian Community Commands, structures of organized popular power that form part of Venezuela's defensive strategy in response to the U.S. military deployment in the Caribbean. The Interior, Justice and Peace Minister, Justado Cabello, will occupy the General Secretariat, while the President of the National Assembly, Jorge Rodriguez, will serve as his Secretary General and head of propaganda and counter-propaganda. The Ministry of Education's Hector Rodriguez will lead the Secretariat for Social Movements and the partisan alliance Gran Polo Patriótico Simón Bolívar. From the Venezuelan vice presidency, Delcy Rodriguez has launched a direct warning to the world. In her view, the United States is trying to seize Venezuela's oil. She points out that since mid-August of this year, Trump has been executing a campaign of harassment and threats that, according to Caracas, endanger regional and international peace and stability. Venezuela formally denounces that Washington seeks to take control of its vast oil reserves, the largest on the planet, through the use of lethal military force against Venezuelan territory, its people, and its institutions. This is the lens through which Caracas interprets the massive deployment, not as a narrow counter-narcotics mission, but as a coercive military posture aimed at regime change and resource capture. On the U.S. side, the scale of military assets moved into the Caribbean is unprecedented in this context. About 186 Tomahawk cruise missiles, warships, submarines, aircraft carriers, combat aircraft, and roughly 20,000 personnel. Experts consulted describe this as excessive for a simple anti-drug operation and far more consistent with preparations for direct coercive action. Publicly, Washington maintains that this is about narcotics trafficking. But international analysts see a clear political objective: ratchet up pressure on Maduro at a time when his government suffers diplomatic isolation, deep economic crisis, and accusations of involvement in narco trafficking. The signal being sent is unmistakable. The U.S. has the capacity to conduct a major strike on Venezuelan soil if the political decision is made. This perception is fueling anxiety in Maduro's inner circle, which accuses Washington of seeking to overthrow him under the pretext of drugs and democracy, when the real prize in their narrative is oil. Meanwhile, in the United States Senate, Minority Leader Chuck Schumer here, referido como Jack Sammer in some reports, warns that Congress will move to restrain Trump if he expands military operations against Venezuela. He invokes the War Powers Resolution, insisting that the authority to declare war belongs to Congress, not the president. This comes after Trump ordered Venezuela's airspace effectively closed to U.S.-linked flights, a move Caracas labels a direct attack on its sovereignty, an extravagant, illegal, and unjustified attempt to strangle the country. Colombia, for its part, views the closure of Venezuelan airspace and the broader aviation warnings as a political act of blockade rather than a legitimate safety measure. Colombian officials argue that this has nothing to do with international aviation rules, the Chicago Convention, or the standards of the global aviation system. They highlight that a U.S. notice to pilots urging extreme caution in Venezuelan airspace due to increased military activity has the practical effect of stigmatizing Venezuelan skies and discouraging commercial operations, deepening the pressure on Caracas under a technical pretext. Cuba also enters the picture. President Miguel Diaz-Canel has condemned U.S. policy toward Venezuela, describing it as a hostile strategy aimed at overthrowing a legitimate government. He calls the gunboat diplomacy and the discredited Monroe Doctrine relics of a neocolonial past. According to him, Latin America and the Caribbean are a peace zone, as declared by CELAC in 2014, and the U.S. military deployment in Caribbean waters violates those principles. Havana frames the American posture as an aggression not only against Venezuela, but against regional stability itself. When Washington declared Venezuelan airspace de facto closed, Caracas called it a direct attack on the stability of all Latin America and the Caribbean. While all of this unfolds, attention also shifts to Moscow. Russian President Vladimir Putin is set to meet in the next hours with the special envoy of the White House, Steve Witkoff, rendering of Steve Witkoff or a similar name, with whom he will address the state of negotiations to end the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Putin has described the battlefield situation as a tragedy for the Ukrainian people, caused by what he calls the criminal policies of those who took power in Kiev. He has been meeting with Chief of the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, and other senior commanders to receive reports on operations in Donetsk, Kharkov, and Zaporozhye. According to Putin, Ukrainian forces cannot keep pace with Russia's advances in the south. At the same time, Russia is trumpeting a battlefield success: the claimed total capture of the city of Pokros in eastern Ukraine, which Putin hails as an important victory after a prolonged campaign. The Kremlin argues that taking this former logistical hub of the Ukrainian army will help Moscow achieve its broader war aims. Putin, dressed in official military attire, publicly thanks his commanders and stresses that this is a key direction and that everyone understands its importance, saying that this victory will enable solutions to the tasks that were set at the beginning of the so-called special military operation. However, the Ukrainian side disputes Moscow's narrative. The operational group of the Ukrainian army responsible for the Eastern Front has denied that the Russians have fully taken Pokros. They state that search and destroy operations against Russian forces continue in urban areas of the city. According to their communiqué, Russian troops attempted a propaganda stunt by raising the tricolor flag in one district to declare the city conquered, only to flee rapidly afterward. This highlights the ongoing battle not only for territory, but for perception, each side trying to frame the same events as victory or illusion. European leaders, meanwhile, struggle with their own political and strategic dilemmas. French President Emmanuel Macron reiterates that Ukraine retains full French support even as complicated issues remain unresolved in ongoing peace negotiations. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky admits that difficult matters are still on the table. U.S. negotiators have arrived in Moscow to push Russia toward ending the war, while NATO debates how to maintain support for Kyiv and implement the so-called 28-point peace or security plan. Within the alliance, the new Secretary General, Mark Rutte, underscores that support packages for Ukraine will include not only defensive, but also offensive elements. He explains that they will discuss how to institutionalize aid so that it does not depend on constant ad hoc fundraising, even if he personally is prepared to go cap in hand to secure contributions for Ukraine. He notes that around two-thirds of NATO members are now participating in these efforts and that more is needed in December to put support on a stable footing next year. But behind these assurances lies a deeper anxiety, particularly in Germany. German General Christian Freuding points out that the most disturbing change in Europe is not on the battlefield, but in Washington. The once reliable, round-the-clock lines of communication with U.S. defense officials have been cut. Berlin received no advance warning when the Trump administration halted weapon shipments to Ukraine. Freuding only learned after the decision was already implemented. Now, German diplomats in Washington scramble to find someone in the Pentagon who can explain what is going on. Europe, which tied its security architecture to American constancy, is discovering how vulnerable it is when that constancy disappears. At the same time, the European Union faces another kind of crisis, this one internal. Belgian police have raided the EU's diplomatic service in Brussels, the College of Europe in Bruges, and private homes as part of an investigation into the alleged misuse of EU funds. Early morning searches across Belgium led to document seizures and 3 arrests on suspicion of procurement, fraud, corruption, and criminal conflicts of interest. Around 10, plainclothes officers entered the headquarters of the European External Action Service at 7:30 inches the morning. The investigation began after accusations that the EEAS and the College of Europe misappropriated EU money in 2021 and 2022 during training programs for junior diplomats. The scandal has now engulfed Federica Mogherini, former EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and ex-Vice President of the European Commission. She has been serving as rector of the College of Europe since 2020. Reports from Belgian media indicate that she has been detained as part of this probe. The European Public Prosecutor's Office confirms that its investigation focuses on alleged violations of fair competition rules in the selection process for candidates in EU-funded programs. This is the latest in a series of corruption cases that erode public trust in EU institutions at a time when Europe is already under enormous geopolitical and economic pressure. Elsewhere, tensions spill into maritime security. In the Black Sea, near the Turkish coast, a tanker has been attacked roughly 100 kilometers from Turkish shores. The vessel Mintid Bolga II, carrying sunflower oil from Russia to Georgia, reported being struck about 80 nautical miles off the coast. Authorities state that none of the 13 crew members are injured and the tanker has not requested assistance, continuing its journey toward the Turkish port city of Sinop under its own power. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan condemns Ukrainian attacks on 2 tankers near Turkey's exclusive economic zone, declaring that such actions, which threaten navigation, lives, and environmental safety, are intolerable. He warns that the Ukraine conflict has reached a stage where it clearly endangers freedom of navigation in the Black Sea, another sign of the war's wider fallout. Domestically, in Spain, economic and regulatory tensions are also visible. The Ministry of Finance has decided to delay by 1 year the implementation of a new invoice verification system known as Verifactu to give companies more time to adapt. Anticipated chaos over the rollout, combined with widespread lack of awareness, surveys suggest more than half of affected businesses did not even know about it, forced the government's hand. The Council of Ministers has approved extending the deadline for digitalizing invoicing processes for firms and the self-employed, in part to comply with commitments made to the party junts, Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez confirms that this extension will be enacted via royal decree law to serve two goals: providing more adjustment time and fulfilling political agreements with junts, particularly those related to Carles Puigdemont. Once again, fiscal modernization is entangled with high-stakes political bargaining. Turning back to the United States, the Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, Japan, one of the pillars of American air power in the Pacific, has been intensifying preparations for potential Chinese missile threats. Located around 600 kilometers from Taiwan, Kadena is the closest large U.S. air base to the island and hosts rotating fighter squadrons and drone fleets from the Air Force, Marines, and Navy. Recently, civil engineering squadrons there conducted rapid runway repair drills during a base-wide readiness exercise. Engineers and explosive ordnance disposal personnel practiced filling craters, clearing debris, and restoring the surface of what the U.S. calls a mission-essential airfield. The message is clear. The United States is preparing not only to project power from this base, but to quickly recover it after an attack in a theater where missile strikes and contested airspace are no longer hypothetical. At home, Washington is also dealing with the consequences of its own use of force. The White House has confirmed that Defense Secretary Pete Gessetz, a stand-in for Patrick or a similar figure in this narrative, authorized an admiral to conduct a follow-on strike against a suspected narco-trafficking vessel in the Caribbean in early September, describing the attack as an act of self-defense. The administration insists that presidentially designated narco-terrorist groups can be subject to lethal targeting under the laws of war. In the case of the September 2 incident, the admiral allegedly acted within his authority, ensuring the destruction of the boat and eliminating what was presented as a threat to the United States. Officials emphasize that there is a sharp policy difference from the previous administration. The current one is more willing to employ lethal force against designated narco-terrorists, who, they argue, are responsible for flooding the country with drugs like fentanyl. Critics, including some Republicans, question whether such operations are lawful and whether they cross the line into undeclared acts of war. Environmental and climatic shocks add another layer of stress. A powerful winter storm, a so-called bomb cyclone, is preparing to hit the northeastern United States. This is the third winter storm in a week, already dropping significant snow across parts of the Midwest and severely slowing travel. It is expected to bring the first widespread snowfall of the season to the Northeast and New England, causing chaotic commuting conditions before rapidly intensifying along the coast, with strong wind gusts likely. Cities like Philadelphia, New York, and Boston are in the projected path. Roughly 55 million people are under winter weather alerts. Louis, Kansas City, and Houston have recorded new snowfall records. Chicago's airports have suffered over 100 delays and more than 300 cancellations due to snow and ice. States of emergency and school closures are being announced in various northeastern regions. Once again, the fragility of critical infrastructure under climate extremes is laid bare. Politically, Washington is also watching developments in Honduras. Donald Trump claims that the country is trying to manipulate the results of recent presidential elections. He warns that chaos will erupt if that turns out to be true. According to Trump, the National Electoral Commission abruptly halted the vote count at midnight on November 30, when only 47% of ballots had been tallied, and Tito Asfura held a narrow lead of about 500 votes over Salvador Nasrallah. Trump has backed Asfura, portraying Nasrallah as unreliable for freedom and untrustworthy. He insists the count must be completed and implies that any deviation could have grave consequences. Once again, one's rhetoric about electoral integrity abroad is tightly interwoven with its own strategic preferences. On the legal front, tension between Washington and international institutions is rising. The president of the International Criminal Court, Japanese judge Tomoko Akane, has denounced U.S. sanctions against 9 ICC officials, noting that they have been placed on lists usually reserved for terrorists and narco-traffickers. She stresses that the court will not yield to pressure and that its independence remains intact. These attacks on the ICC intensified after it issued arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin over the war in Ukraine and for the Israeli prime minister over crimes in Palestine. 9 senior ICC officials, including 6 judges, have been sanctioned in response to investigations involving Israel. By equating them with terrorists and drug lords, Washington sends a clear message. It rejects any attempt by the ICC to assert jurisdiction over U.S. allies or its own actions. The court, in turn, insists that the law must apply even to the powerful. Beyond geopolitics and law, science is generating its own shocks. The interstellar object 3I Atlas continues to perplex astronomers with its unusual behavior as it passes through the inner solar system. Most likely an exotic comet, it nevertheless scores a 4 on the LOE scale due to a cluster of anomalies. Its trajectory is almost perfectly aligned with the plane of the solar system, producing a striking anti-tail that points toward the Sunday. It exhibits an atypical speed profile, peculiar chemical composition with excess nickel and low water content, unusual light reflection characteristics, and an apparent origin region near the zone associated with the famous WOW signal. Each of these factors could be explained individually, but together they make the object statistically rare. Many scientists argue it is almost certainly natural, but rare enough to warrant intense monitoring. Since December 2025, observatories have been tracking 3I Atlas's acceleration, cometary activity, chemical spectrum, polarization, and any changes in its trajectory or physical state in order to better understand what this interstellar visitor really is. It is only the third known object from beyond our solar system to pass through our neighborhood, and it is leaving behind a trail of organic compounds and unanswered questions. Recent measurements show it is releasing molecules crucial to prebiotic chemistry, sparking debates about its nature. Social media has predictably spawned theories of artificial origin, but NASA has been unequivocal. The object behaves like a comet. No signals or patterns indicating engineered propulsion or manufacturing have been detected. Its dynamics match those of an icy body heated by the Sunday. Equally intriguing is research coming out of Chernobyl. Scientists there have studied the fungus Cladosporium sphaerospermum, which grows faster under radiation and partially absorbs it thanks to its melanin. In practical terms, it converts radiation into energy. On the International Space Station, its growth rate was 20% higher than on Earth. The harsh space environment, combined with its unique biology, suggests that a living bioshield could be developed directly in space. This would be a cheaper, lighter, and self-repairing alternative to heavy radiation shielding materials. For future missions to the Moon or Mars, instead of transporting massive metal shields, we might cultivate fungal walls capable of protecting astronauts from radiation. All of these developments, Venezuela's standoff with the United States, the buildup of U.S. naval power in the Caribbean, guerrilla war preparations, European corruption scandals, NATO's struggle to maintain coherence, the shifting reliability of Washington, the legal battles over international justice, the militarization of space in the Pacific, extreme climate events in North America, contested elections in Central America, mysterious visitors from beyond our solar system, and even radiation-eating fungi form a mosaic. They reveal a world in which power is asserted not just on the battlefield, but in courts, parliaments, laboratories, and even in the skies and deep space. As I, Scott Ritter, look across this landscape, what I see is a system under strain, empires pressing their advantage, institutions pushed to their limits, and new discoveries, reminding us that while we fight over oil, borders, and votes, the universe continues to throw us phenomena that could reshape our understanding of life, security, and survival. And at the center of today's picture, we return to 2 key axes. The ultimatum from Trump to Maduro, backed by overwhelming force off Venezuela's coast, and the crucial meeting in Moscow between Vladimir Putin and the U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff where the shape of the next phase of the Ukraine conflict and perhaps the broader global order will be quietly negotiated, far from the cameras, but with consequences that will ripple through every story I have just described.